Would help if I do this. This is your official welcome to the January meeting of the Village Garden Club. Good to see all of you. If your friends aren't here, tell them to come next month. The refreshments group asked us to give a special thanks today to these individuals who brought refreshments. And if you enjoyed those and you haven't brought them yet, next month's a good month to do that. This is a report from the nominating committee. You want to? Sure. Yeah.
Okay. Sue Kalish is the chair of the nominating committee. She's not able to be here today, so she asked us to give her report. So according to our bylaws, the nominating committee consists of a chairman appointed by the co-presidents and 3 members and 2 alternates selected at the January general meeting. The members of the nominating committee to serve for 1 year. So this year's nominating committee chair is Sue Kalish, and the members are Devonna Hall, Lee Hartman, and Gaynor Pates. Alternatives are Ann Craig and Leslie Dupree. The nominating committee will present a proposed slate of officers at the March general meeting, which is on the 23rd, and the proposed slate will also be in the April newsletter. The election of officers shall be by ballot at the April general meeting on April 27th. The officers will be installed at the May general meeting on May 25th and take office upon installation. So we have some more reports here. First of all, a garden tour report is Maureen O'Marilyn.
Good morning, everyone. We are excited to announce that the member garden tour for 2023 is being planned, and it's coming together beautifully. And the date is April 20th, so mark your calendars. It's from 10 to 2, April 20th is a Thursday. And the tickets are $30 and will include a light lunch. And they are available for purchase during our February and March meeting, as well as the Sign Up Genius. And so Marilyn's going to tell you about the gardens now.
Our tour this year will feature 4 gorgeous Mediterranean-inspired gardens, each with its own aesthetic and flavor. All of the gardens are located in Rancho Santa Fe. Carpooling is highly recommended because it's fun and it will help with the parking. So I'll describe each of the gardens real briefly. The Lester Garden is a stunning example of classic California style with an emphasis on indoor-outdoor living. Lovely paved terraces are framed by a leafy landscape and seem to speak of relaxation and alfresco meals. And I've had an alfresco meal in this garden, and I felt like I died and gone to heaven. The Oliphant Garden is a tapestry of colorful, easy-care, drought-tolerant Mediterranean plants and native shrubs, leading one's eye out toward the countryside beyond the garden and out to the distant sea. So it's beautiful. And it has a striking pool and hardscape, which is reminiscent of a design by the late Thomas Church. Next, the Hudson Garden is a Tuscan-inspired garden which is perfectly suited to the architecture of the house. Classic Italian parterres enclose billowing roses and imported irises. Pathways lead to splashing fountains and focal points, including a magnificent wisteria-draped pergola. Lastly, the Freimiller Garden is a verdant paradise with numerous garden rooms. Climbing roses scramble over unique stacked log fences. Herbs and perennials spill onto pathways, leading to little clearings full of surprises. And tall, ancient eucalyptus trees shade a large natural pond. We think you will be enchanted with each of these Rancho Santa Fe gardens and inspired as well, and we think it's going to be a beautiful day in the neighborhood.
Thank you. We can't wait for that garden tour. Next, we have a schoolyard gardens report. Lee, Mary, Annette, Susan. Oh, here she is.
Mostly, I just want to thank Susan, who's not here, for creating this marvelous fundraising opportunity that was just a Kodachrome Yankee Doodle Dandy Day at the top of Mount Soledad with, beautiful vistas and inspiring stories. And I think we raised about $1,200 on that. I mean, for us. There was a little more than that after expenses. So thank all y'all. And that's about it.
Next, expressions in art and flowers. Janet, yes, she is.
We are excited that this year we are having expressions in its original format. So there will be live artists and live face-to-face expressions with floral designers. Now, the artists will display on March 23rd. Artists and floral designers will work on Wednesday, April 26th, and on Thursday, April 27th. All of you should be here to see how fabulous our members are. So I hope you'll be here, and I would encourage all of you to think about what you could do as either an artist or a floral designer, or help on the committee. So thanks so much.
Good morning, I'm Annette Ritchie-Bice, and for the 5th time, we're going to do the air plant Tillandsia project at my home, 7890 Torrey Lane. I'm in the book. I have so far some new members and newer members that have signed up, so God bless you. It's a great way to get together. Some new members, Glee Longston, Katie Pelsek, others, and Anna Lyon, sorry, I can't read my writing, Carol Carlisle, and Paula McGrath. I could use about 8 more, so I'm in the book, Annette Ritchie-Bice. And what we do, we take the little Tillandsias, the air plants, and we put them on cork or in shells, so they're lightweight, and they're part of the veterans program. They go to the VA hospital. So I do it usually in the morning between 10 and 1 o'clock. That'll be March 15th or the 16th, and this is weather depending. But I also thought it would be funny to share a blurb with you. I get most of the Tillandsias from a place called Davis Tillandsia Farms in Encinitas. Well, they're not selling cork like they used to, so they told me to look up another website, Virgin Cork Wholesale Scraps, and you wouldn't believe what popped up. San Diego. I thought, San Diego associated with Virgin Cork, Dick's Liquor, that was a surprise. So I thought, well, let me get rid of the word virgin and see what comes up. And it says, stop buying junk. So I miss the days of somebody just answering the phone, and when you walk in the room, you flip on a light switch and you turn it off. But those days are gone. So anyways, March 15th or 16th, for the Veterans Tillandsia project at my home. Again, I'm in the book, and if you have some of your own supplies, such as glue glue guns, I'd really appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you, Susie Johnson, for making fun of me.
Elaine Butts asked us to announce, I'm hoping I'm saying this right, Backyardia and Roadsidea. She and Jeannie Smith are going to demonstrate how to gather from your own garden and from the roadsides around your house to put together beautiful bouquets. This is going to be on Wednesday, April the 19th from 1 to 3 in Elaine's backyard, and the signups are going to take place at the March meeting. And before we go on to our introduction of our speaker, we have the hospitality, what do you call it, drawing? Opportunity drawing, okay. So we have some lovely things down here. Can I take this off? Is this gonna follow me? Oh, it is. So we have some lovely things down here. Do you want to come down and supervise this, or just have people choose? Oh, okay. So the first, I'm going to point this out because Lacey Comore did this beautiful arrangement for the refreshment table. And, oh, thank you, Ross. And that's lucky number. That could be one of the things. And then there's some other little gifts down here. So the first number is 156. It's the last three numbers on your ticket. Ooh, lucky you. You got first choice. Okay. The next number is 178. Or the flowers. $155. Oh, Diana. Okay. Yeah, there you go, Eva. Yeah. Okay. Did we say 167? $167? Oh, Suzanne. Okay, that's it. Perfect. Thank you. Thank you to Barbara and Susan for organizing this every month. Okay. You're on, Jean. You're on. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you very much. Did you all know that there are 25,000 orchid species and about 1 in 10 flowering plants in the world is an orchid? I didn't know that. Last year, the Union Tribune printed an article about orchids featuring our speaker today, Deborah Halliday, who lives in Rancho Santa Fe. There, she nurtures her diverse collection of orchids in a greenhouse and a shaded house, an attached shade house. Deborah is the current president of the San Diego Orchid Society, and she's been growing orchids since 1970, when she and her husband grew their first collection in a tiny greenhouse behind their row house in Brooklyn. They left New York in 1971 and started an international trading business based in the Caribbean, after which they moved to California, continuing their international ventures from here. By 2002, they were pursuing their orchid hobby seriously and eventually assembled a collection of 750 orchids. These are just a small portion for you to see today. Sadly, Deborah's husband passed away in 2012, but she was firmly committed to their orchids and carried on. Deborah delights in sharing her accumulated knowledge of orchids with others, and she is eager to share it with us today. Please help me welcome Deborah Halliday.
Okay. Oh, I'm on. Isn't that exciting? Okay. Hello, everybody. It's really, really a pleasure to talk to you. As you may have guessed, I'm fairly passionate about orchids. And I'm going to turn that off so it isn't interfering. And have had a great deal of pleasure growing them over the years. We have nurtured and given away any number of orchid collections before starting our present collection. Well, it's my present collection in Rancho Santa Fe. What I'm going to do today is I'm going to give you some ideas of orchids you could grow outdoors or in your house, but I'm primarily going to talk to you about how you succeed with orchids. What makes orchids different from the other plants in your garden, and how you can use an understanding of those differences to make yourself into a successful orchid grower. They are very, very rewarding. Orchids will make you wait a long time while they're growing their flower spikes, but if you wait, they will reward your patience with gorgeous blooms and wonderful fragrances. So let's proceed. Let me see if I can work this. Do I do that? Oh, back. Okay, so I'm going to try to open my computer here so I don't have to keep looking back at the screen and I can look at you people instead. There we go. So let me gear up just a second here. I'm a person who throughout my life has been a rather poor memorizer of lists. Lists of names, lists of rules. They come and they go, you know. You go into your history final and you've got this list of names and this list of dates, and all you're really sure of is they don't go together. But images and concepts actually mean something to me. So today I'm going to try to put in your brains images and a feel for who orchids are and how they live. And my computer is just not coming up. Anyway, we can go to the next slide. So, growing orchids in San Diego. San Diego is a uniquely wonderful place to grow orchids. There are many, many orchids that will grow outdoors very happily in our climate. We also have a lot of bright sunshine all the time, so even indoor orchids will get plenty of light from a bright window or, you know, glass doors onto your patio, something like that. So success in indoor growing is practically guaranteed in our area as well. There are, as Jean said, there are more than 30,000 species of orchids. Let me pause here just a second, and you're all gardeners, so I'm sure you know the difference between a species and a hybrid, but I get so many people who look at me blankly and say, really, what is a species? Well, a species is the plant as it evolved in nature. And it is a specific group of plants that when bred together keep coming out the same. A hybrid is when you take two of those groups, those specific comes from the word species. You take those two specific orchids and breed them together, and then you get a hybrid. You can then go further and breed hybrids together and get ever more exotic things. Particularly with orchids, orchids are a little different from some of the other flowering plants in that they have what they call alliances. So they're even intergeneric hybrids. So a genera is a related group of species. Usually those don't cross together successfully, but in orchids, certain groups of them do. And this gives you a great deal of flexibility, and the orchid hybrids out there are fascinating. And so are the species. I mean, most people start with hybrids because one of the things that hybridizers are trying to achieve is not just more and more beautiful flowers, they're also trying to achieve easier and easier plants to grow, because orchids have their little niches that they grow in, and they may want a very narrow range of temperatures or very picky about humidity. But if you breed it to someone who's from a slightly different area, then suddenly you've broadened that range, because you have parents that went from intermediate to cool, and a parent that went from intermediate to warm. So now you have an orchid maybe that will go from warm to cool in the hybrid. So it's a good place, particularly if you're starting with orchids. It's easier to be successful often with the hybrids. And then once you're really feeling very proud of your skills, then the species are endlessly fascinating. They occur on every continent except Antarctica. So there are terrestrial orchids. I took a wonderful trip to France to see the native orchids of France. And they're darling little things. They grow in the ground, they go dormant in the winter, they come up in the summer, and there they are, just growing like little wildflowers out in the hayfields. And it's just quite fascinating because they're these beautiful little orchids. So on we go. You only have to get a few things right to succeed with orchids, but these things need to be right. Water. Orchids need to be almost dry between waterings, and we'll discuss why that is. Light. Orchids, again, they need bright indoor light or partial shade if they are outdoors, and I'm going to show you why that's so. Temperature. For the indoor growers, for Phalaenopsis and some of the more delicate Paphiopedilums, they don't want to go below about 60 degrees. So you're safe giving your indoor orchids a summer vacation on the patio in a lot of shade, but before the nights get too cold, they're going to want to be indoors. Feeding, well, we in the orchid trade recommend that you do what we call weekly. That is a week solution of fertilizer every week or every time you water. And I will go into that more detail. You need to be on the alert for pests because many of the conditions that orchids love to grow in, insects also love to grow in. So I will also go into that in more detail. So let's talk a minute and think a minute about how orchids actually grow. Orchids are a very old plant family. They moved into the trees about 30 million years ago. They find orchid pollen preserved in amber. What happened is that as the plants were really burgeoning, the forest floor became very crowded, and orchids adapted to a tree environment. We call them epiphytes. That means a plant that grows on a tree. These are not parasites. They're not taking any sort of nourishment from the tree. They have simply opted to get up off the forest floor where there's a little more light and a little more space and populate the trees. Well, this does some important things. Phalaenopsis, for instance, they come from the Philippines, and we grow them in pots, with their little crowns facing up. Well, in nature, as you can see, they grow not only on tree branches, but on tree trunks, and their natural orientation is sort of drooping downwards. And their roots are like ropes holding onto the tree. I will show you some when I'm showing the plants of how tightly they can grip a tree. Orchid roots actually change physically when they come in contact with a suitable surface, and the cells themselves just sort of glue themselves to the surface. So they're cool that way. Come on, next. And here's some other orchids. In the wild, most of the orchids that we grow are of the epiphytic group. I mean, orchids include some ground dwellers and the terrestrial, we call them terrestrial because they grow in the terrace or the earth. They are quite fun to grow as well. But I'm mostly going to talk today about how you grow epiphytes and how they're different from African violets and daisies and all those other things. So the roots attach the plants to the trees. They get light from shade to full sun, but mainly they are living on trees. So you can begin to think about, well, what is the light like? You know, if I'm living on a tree, living on a branch, what kind of light am I getting? So these are some orchids I saw along the Rio Negro and the Amazon. So I'm recommending that you let nature be your guide. That if you think about the tree habitat, it tells you a lot of what you need to know to be successful. The light. Well, orchids grow in tree shade. If you're living on a tree branch or a tree trunk, you're living in tree shade. It's not heavy shade. It's not cave shade like your house is. You have to think of your home as cave shade because light falls off so quickly from a window that if you move your orchids very far at all, it is going to be way too dark. They might survive, but they will never, ever bloom for you. Water. How about watering orchids? This is a very tricky thing with orchids. A lot of people have trouble with it. Well, what happens to an orchid? It's living on the tree, its roots are hanging out, attaching it to the tree, and when it rains, it gets dumped on. I mean, if you've ever seen a tropical downpour, that is serious, serious rain. But it stops after a while, and the moist breezes blow, and those roots almost dry out. Because it's humid, they don't dry out completely, but they almost dry out, and then it rains again. And this is what orchid roots are adapted for, and it is what they must have. Temperature. Find out where your individual orchids grow, and try to accommodate that. I do recommend that for best success, that you start with what you can offer. Start with your particular microclimate. What direction does your patio face? What's the temperature range? How humid is it at your house? All those things, and then try to find orchids that already fit that. Because then it is much easier to nurture an orchid that basically likes it here than to try to adapt your environment to an orchid that basically doesn't like it. You know, we all get seduced. I have any number of wonderful things that come from the Ecuadorian cloud forest where it's always cold and always damp. And they really, really, really hate it at my house. And, you know, I've tried them in the greenhouse, I've tried them in the shade house, I've misted them, I've done this, I've done that, and they just look at me and they die. So I now don't do those. My friend in Point Loma, she is amazing with those orchids, but she lives in the San Diego cloud forest, so they are happy there. I can grow things she can't grow. And we plant our plants in orchid bark because it is got so many air spaces, because you cannot pack orchid bark. Okay, the bigger the roots, the bigger the bark. What we want is something where we can drench it very quickly, and then where the air remains moist, but it's air, it's not water. And so the orchid roots get to sit in a nice moist air environment until you drown them with water once again. You want to pay attention to the roots. In general, if the roots are happy, the orchid is happy. And if your roots are stressed and not growing and getting rotten or dry, then your plant is clearly in difficulty. What's the root structure? Well, an orchid root is basically a tissue sponge around a vessel. And if you think about what happens to a kitchen sponge if you were to leave it in 1.5 inches of water in a basin for a week or so, you know what happens if you leave an orchid root sodden. It will rot and get smelly, and just like your kitchen sponge would. If you rot the sponge, no water can get to the vessel. If it can't get to the vessel, it can't get to the leaves. So often, a wilted plant is not necessarily too dry. It may be too wet. It may be that you have rotted the sponge. What happens when especially with Phalaenopsis, the plant had its roots destroyed or they're dying and it's starting to wilt, and so you water it more. And there's one main benefit to this, and that is that it puts both of you out of your misery much quicker. But it is not what the orchid wanted. Okay, so I'm going to show you some pictures of roots. So, this is a happy, healthy orchid root. This is a rotted orchid root. And you can see when I pull apart the rotted one, there is that vein. And in the healthy one, that pale green stripe is the vein. And a actively growing root will have a bright green or sometimes a bright brown tip, and the outer surface of it is generally white or silvery, and it's bright and firm. And when your orchid root is hydrated, then it turns bright green. So one way, when you have particularly your Phalaenopsis is in one of those little plastic pots, and you're wondering whether it needs to be watered yet, pick it up and look at it. If the roots in the pot are bright green, put it back down and pat it on the head and tell you that you will look in on it a few days later. Aerial roots, orchids do this. Remember your orchid on the tree. Your Phalaenopsis, when it puts out aerial roots, it is just saying, there's got to be more tree here somewhere. It's just trying to grow in its ordinary way, where it sort of, over time, moves on up the tree. As the old leaves die and the old roots die and the new ones come, it's just kind of very quietly crawling up the tree. So don't cut them off. They are a sign of health and happiness. Come on. Doop. Okay, some watering guidelines. When you water, let the water run through. Our water is salty. You do not want salts to accumulate around the roots of your orchids. There are people there's this whole system, I guess, of just use ice cubes on your Phalaenopsis. Well, the whole point of that is to keep you from overwatering. In our climate, with our water, all it does is concentrate salts. Also, you are putting ice cubes on the roots of a plant that doesn't like to go below 60 degrees. It is not what the plant was dreaming of. So, put the ice cubes in your lemonade and take the orchid to your sink or your bucket and drench it. You cannot overwater in a single watering. You can just water too often. I want you to notice when you have watered a plant, then I want you to feel how heavy it is. It should feel heavy after you water it. If it's living in bark and you water it thoroughly and it feels the same, water it again. Because that's telling you that your bark got so dry that it's no longer picking up water and the water's just running by. You want the plant to feel heavier when you're finished. Then let it drain. Orchids most of them cannot sit with wet feet. And if you have a beautiful jardiniere that you want to put it in, fine. Let it drain, put it back in its jardiniere. All will be well. Do not leave it sitting in water because those roots need a chance to almost dry out. And then when you're wondering when to repot it again, well, the surface should be a bit dry, and the pot should feel noticeably light. It's going to tell you, my water's all gone. The plant used it up, I evaporated, Now we're light, so it's a fine time to water again. In general, a plant that is living in bark can be watered at least in most of the year, about once a week. At the moment, even my plants in bark, I'm only watering about once every 10 days because it's cooler and darker and humider, and they're just not drying out as fast. If you have a plant growing in moss, which a lot of the beautiful little Phalaenopsis are, in the wintertime, sometimes it will take up to 3 weeks before that needs water. Don't worry about it. Orchids are really good at surviving desiccation. They are not nearly as good at surviving drowning. A very dry root does not get destroyed. A very wet root is toast. So when in doubt, put it down. There are other water-related problems. And I'm talking some about Phalaenopsis because I'm sure a lot of you have at least a few in your house because everyone sells them and they get given to you, and they are absolutely gorgeous, gorgeous, wonderful houseplants. But they grow only from the center. And as I told you, they like to grow in this orientation. And so over the 30 million years that they were evolving, they never really worked on clearing water out of the ground. And when we grow them up this way, and we will let water sit in the crown, they don't have a very good way to get rid of it. And it only takes 6 hours for fungus spores to germinate. And if you rot that center leaf, then you have kind of stopped the growth on the whole thing. And sometimes that progresses to crown rot, or sometimes it will send out an offshoot, but that particular rosette will not grow anymore. There are other orchids, some of the dendrobiums, that require a dry winter rest, or they won't bloom at all. And so I have some now sitting in my shade house that I'm giving a complete dry 2 months. And they're getting a little shriveled, but they're hanging out, they're fine. And it will mean that they bloom when spring comes, instead of just sending out more baby plants. When you're growing outdoors, the one thing to keep in mind is that the combination of cold and wet is really hard on plants, on orchids. So cold and wet is a bad combination. Cold and wet equals dead plants. So if you're getting a cold, wet period and your plants don't have any shelter, either put them under shelter or, just leave them alone. Don't give much extra water in the wintertime. Okay, overwatering is absolutely the quickest way to kill an orchid. If you're really tired of that plant, you can drown it and it's out of your life. They need moisture, then air, just like in nature. Rotten roots can't absorb water. The plant is wilted. First, check the roots. See what your problem is. What you may need to do is repot it into better medium. Its medium may be rotting away and holding too much water. When you're not sure, think about the orchid on its tree. There it is. There's your Phalaenopsis, growing the way it's grown for 30 million years before we showed up and started putting it in pots in the living room. Okay? Okay. These are just a few shots of leaves and what it looks like. A desiccated leaf gets sort of grayish, wrinkled, soft, thin, limp. Crown rot, you can look like you have a perfectly healthy leaf, and when you touch it, it comes off. And that's because it got rotted at the base. Healthy plants, the leaves should feel sort of thick and fully hydrated. The right color for orchids is a kind of a yellow-green, not a deep green, because that means they're getting enough light. I'm not talking about super yellow, but just a nice limey green is a good color. And they should have shiny, firm roots. Sometimes orchids just don't respond. It's okay to give up. I hereby give you permission to quit trying to save that one leaf and no roots in a scraggly pot that you are trying like hell to save. We are not orchid doctors. It is okay to just say, I'm sorry, darling, I failed, and throw it in the trash. Then go out and buy the healthiest, most beautiful orchid you can find and try to do better. It's so much easier to succeed with a healthy plant than it is to try to rescue an unhealthy one. Walk by the bargain table at Lowe's. You're not ready for that. Go to the new stuff, the best stuff. That's what you want to start with. Light. Okay, light in orchids. Light's very important. Most orchids like bright shade. Again, they're tree dwellers. The ones that need the most light tend to grow either high in the trees or in trees that grow partially deciduous, where things like Phalaenopsis are growing down on the trunk, where it's darker, but it is still tree shade. Indoors, you want your plants near a bright window. People hear that Phalaenopsis are shade plants, and so they put them on the coffee table in the middle of the living room. You might as well go ahead and put them in the closet. There's not going to be enough light, and they're not going to grow well. House shade and tree shade are different. Think of your house as cave shade. If you want to grow an orchid in a cave, it must be near the entrance to the cave. So, in a bright window. If you want to put it on the dining room table when you have guests coming, by all means, do it. It won't care. But when it all calms down and the dishes are washed, put it back where it likes to be, and that's where you grow it. You know, your job, once the flowers fade, is to grow the plant, and then it will reward you with new flowers another year. An outdoor vacation for your indoor plants works fine. Again, you want to remember, though, that your house is much darker, even by the window, than your patio is going to be. So put them in quite a shady area outdoors so that you don't burn the leaves. And then you can gradually then move them to a little bit brighter area. If the leaves feel warm to the touch, then that's excessive light, and you should be moving them into a little shadier spot. Here's a Phalaenopsis that I have grown for 15 years in the sunroom in my kitchen. Every couple of years I repot it, but it blooms every year. And it's just living in a west-facing window under a skylight. And so totally happy. The leaves tell you something about the light. If you get otherwise healthy-looking plant, especially one that has dark-colored flowers, they may get some dark pigmentation in the leaves. If the leaf otherwise looks healthy, that's likely just natural pigmentation, as you see in the center plant. Excess light, you can see the plant up there, is getting kind of tight, and those bulbs are called pseudobulbs, and those are getting kind of desiccated and flat. So that's getting actually more light than it would like. And that is sunburn. So once that happens to your leaf, that leaf is done. It's unsightly. You can cut below it and then move that plant out of so much sun. But it's not going to get better. I want to point up there for my clicker, and that's not where the clicker receiver is. So anyway, humidity. There's no very good substitute for humidity. All of these orchids tend to the epiphytes come from different elevations in the tropics. So the cool growers are growing higher on the mountains, the warm growers are maybe down in the river valleys or near the beach, but in general, they are living in areas with substantial humidity. And they like probably at least 50%. You are fortunate where you live in that our outdoor humidity range is pretty much perfect. With the exception of Santa Ana's, we're just right. We're in that nice, 40 to 70 range, which is what orchids really love. Your house may be a little less humid, and if your orchids seem to be drying out really fast or just looking a bit poorly, you can always put them on a humidity tray where they're on some sort of a little stand over some water, and the evaporation around them will create a microclimate. You don't want your flowers damp at night because then you can get botrytis, which is a fungus that causes spots. And one of my plants here has got some spots on the flowers because we went through such a long period of rainy, cold nights. And so some got a little spotting. Okay, these are some examples of plant trays. If you're using that, a copper strip, it can be put in them to prevent algae growth. And then feeding your orchids. Okay, let's talk about orchids on a tree and how they get fed. Every time it rains, it washes the tree. And it washes down bird droppings and dead leaves and assorted gunge gets mixed into that water. And so the orchid roots are getting a very light feeding every time it rains. And that's the kind of feeding they really like. I fertilize all of my orchids once a week. Or, yeah, the ones I water more often, I have mounted ones that don't get fed every time I water them, but they get fed once a week. And I change the concentration of the fertilizer a little bit for the wintertime when they're not growing as rapidly and raise it up in the spring and summer. In general, you can use a balanced fertilizer, Miracle Grow or any of those. You want the numbers to sort of match, 10, 10, 10, 20, 20, 20, something like that. And use it at about a quarter strength. And that means if they say, put a teaspoon in a gallon, you put a quarter teaspoon in a gallon. And do it every time you water it. And you will find you get more robust growth, you get more flowers, you get a sturdier plant that is less likely to get diseases. And for cymbidiums and some of the larger potted plants, the slow-release fertilizer is really useful, those granules. And you can buy them that will last like 9 months. So, and it's a good supplement. I know cymbidiums are pretty heavy feeders, and I have a tendency to starve my cymbidiums. And now, if I remember to put that slow-release fertilizer, they do much better. Okay, how do you rebloom a phalaenopsis? People ask about that. If you look on the bloom stalk, I'm going to just grab one of mine to show you what I'm talking about. Okay, so here we have a phale, and along this bloom stalk, there are these little buds. You've felt them. And once these flowers fade, if you want to cheat another blooming, you can cut it right above the first live bud. And you can see this one's already starting to branch, even though it's sort of anticipating. When those flowers are done, I'm going to be ready, I'm going to be there. And you can get as many flowers off a branch as you had the first time. It's a neat way to extend your blooming season from the 1 or 2 months you're already going to get into another 1 or 2 months. So it's good fun. You don't really want to do it more than a couple of times because if you keep the plant in bloom all the time, it eventually will say, that's enough. And I almost killed a beautiful white phalaenopsis because I managed to keep it in bloom pretty much all the time for about 2 years. And it then refused to do anything but barely live for the next 2 years. Okay, let's see. This seems to be, yes, okay. So you can see there's the branch, there's the bud. Here's where it was cut. You can look at all the flowers that are on that branch. And this one has branched everywhere the circles are. 1, 2, 3. Time to stop with that poor guy. Controlling pests, because orchid environments are great places for pests. Sticky leaves are not natural. They are an indication that you may very well have sucking insects because things like aphids and scale exude a honeydew. That's what they excrete. And it makes the leaves sticky. You might also find that you're getting black mildew growing on that sticky leaf. So if you're seeing sticky leaves or a black residue, look for bugs. You're most likely looking for scale and mealybugs. And you should treat then when you find it, because these bugs walk around remarkably well. Oops, I want to go back to that. Okay, Phalaenopsis. I swear that there is spontaneous generation of mealybugs on Phalaenopsis, that you can have a perfectly clean one sitting in your dining room, and 2 weeks later, suddenly it's got mealybugs. Who knows where they came from? But they do love your Phalaenopsis, and that's what it looks like. It's only about 1/8 of an inch, 1/16 of an inch long. They like to get at the back of the flower, between the petals or under the lip, on the stem, at the back of the petals, and they will also attack other things like dendrobiums and any of your soft-leafed orchids in the very newest growth. They like to attack those also. Here's some other scale pests. This one is the worst one to watch for. It's called Bois Duval scale. It looks, the females look like about a 1/16 of an inch perfect beige circle on your leaves. Sometimes you'll see suddenly that the leaf has this pale disc on it, and you look, and in the very middle of that is one of those female scales. The immature and males are soft and fuzzy and look almost like mealybugs, but tend to form sort of a mat. It's a very destructive scale. If you find it, you really have to treat it, or it can kill your plant. Hard brown scale, they just look like little helmets. Those are easily gotten rid of with a toothbrush. And soft brown scale, which again, that can grow rampantly, especially on the backs of leaves. Spider mites. If you see your leaves suddenly getting this sort of pale stippled look to them instead of being a nice green, they may have spider mites, because spider mites sort of suck out every other chloroplast. So they really are taking part of the green out of your plant. And here you can see there's the mites form webs in a severe infection. So what do? One of the easiest things for the average homeowner to do that is safe for you, safe for your pets, safe for the environment, is a horticultural spray oil. They change the name on these all the time, but what you're looking for is a mineral oil base. I don't recommend neem oil because it can be toxic to flowers. And if you are trying to get rid of mealybugs on your Phalaenopsis, you want something that the flowers can tolerate. And they can tolerate this. I keep it mixed up in a spray bottle in my greenhouse all the time. It also is a very good leaf shine. So you can put a little bit on a tissue to clean your plant if it's gotten some water residue. Here, it's called year-round spray oil. I bought a bottle of all seasons. This is what it looks like. You can check later. It's for sale on Armstrong.
Do you ever use alcohol?
You can, I was going to say that, yes. You could use alcohol on a Q-tip. That will work reasonably well too. You have to contact every plant, every bug. It's a little more drying to the flowers. The way the oil works is it suffocates the scale. And you can even spray the whole plant and it will just keep the scale from living. There's some other magic sprays that I've come up with lately, but you want to know somebody who's already into orchids and beg a little bit from them. There's a spray called N-Star, which is actually a bug hormone, and it keeps baby mealybugs from becoming adults. And it is magic. it doesn't smell, and it's safe, and I love it. Anyway, but alcohol or oil works pretty well, as long as you don't have a huge infestation. And then what I do, especially if I'm attacking a bad scale infection, is I keep a bunch of soft toothbrushes around, and I brush off everything that I can see. Orchid leaves are pretty sturdy, and so you really can just brush at them with a toothbrush and it won't hurt them. Okay, let's look at some beautiful orchid pictures. Talk about various things you can grow. Of course, Phalaenopsis, everybody has them. They are currently the most popular blooming foliage plant in the world. And they come in all sorts of shapes and sizes. You can get some really interesting ones. These are called peloric, and that means that somewhere in the breeding something went wrong. They're mutants, basically. And what's happening is if you look here at the top, where you see that sort of ruffled lip, that lip was trying to be a petal instead of a lip. And so it flattened out. And so they bred for that. This one is a different thing, where you had petals that were trying to act like lips. And so that gives a different shape, and so people continue to breed for that. And there's variegated. I have a beautiful variegated Phalaenopsis up here. Totally charming. Those beautiful green and yellow leaves, and it does this lovely little plume of pink flowers. You can get more interesting Phalaenopsis than you just see in Trader Joe's. One of our vendors at the Orchid Show this weekend carries beautiful stuff. She's got fragrant ones, she's got all sorts of cool stuff. And the Phalaenopsis species are very interesting. They're good fun. Okay, I just brought it up. Okay, this very weekend in Balboa Park in room 101 in the Prado, we are having our winter orchid show, as we do at the end of every January. And if you enjoy seeing the plants that I have to show you today, you really should come to the show, because we have so many good growers in the club. We have a whole wall that's nothing but orchid species, so you can see all the wonderful weirdness of orchids. And then there'll be loads of cattleyas, and some of the dendrobiums will be coming into bloom, and you'll get to see a variety of things. It is Saturday. The display opens at noon to 5, but the sales area opens at 10. So. And we open the display area, it's in the same room, it's just one half. But we open the display area as soon as we finish judging. And then on Sunday, it's from 10 to 4. We also have free orchid classes. There'll be classes, there should be 4 classes on Saturday and again on Sunday. Have I what? Not yet. Okay, these are some wonderful species. You can see they're quite different. Some of them grow, this one, for instance, it sends out flower spikes, and the flower spikes rebloom year after year. So the older it gets, the more of those it gets, and it gets more and more wonderful and weird the longer you have it. This one has these beautiful marbled leaves. This is one of my favorites. And it produces this gorgeous head of very fragile pink flowers that kind of twitter in the wind when it's just, I love it. And this guy is teeny little flowers. They're about 1 inch across, and they have these white petioles. So they're rather special too. Anyway, and I know that one perfectly, and its name has escaped me for the moment, but they are gorgeous big flowers, and these plants grow huge leaves. There's a group of them from Borneo that grow these extra large leaves. So, yeah, what's not to like about Phalaenopsis? You know, they're cheap, they look beautiful in your house, they're easy to get, they last for months and months, they're like the ultimate cut flower. But people, you're gardeners. You don't have to throw away your Phalaenopsis when the flowers fade. And just because the flowers have faded doesn't mean the plant is dying. When your roses go out of bloom, you don't say, my roses died. It's the same with an orchid. When they drop their flowers, it simply means they're done blooming now. If that flower spike is still green, you can cut it back and get a branch. If it has turned brown, then you can cut it all the way down. Its only job is to carry flowers. And it's going to make a new one next spring. So they tend to bloom mostly once a year. They're all setting spikes about now, and then they'll start to bloom from now on through the spring and summer. And many of them now are fragrant. They're breeding Phalaenopsis to get some fragrance in them, which is quite fun. A good pal, a good friend indoors for Phalaenopsis are some of the tropical slipper orchids. And I'm talking about Paphiopedilums. And those, again, you have really delightful little species. This is what they call a complex hybrid. This has got so many different things in its parental background that it's like a human being. You'd never get it figured out. This is another species, and look at the beautiful leaves. A lot of the Paphiopedilums have lovely leaves, so when they're out of bloom, they make nice little foliage plants. They tend to hold their flowers as long as the phales do. So at least a month they'll hold on to their flowers. And some of them have hairs and calluses and spots and all sorts of fun stuff going on. This is an outdoor growing Paphiopedilum. So rather than being a friend inside to the phales, this one grows in my shade house, and there are a number of them that really prefer to grow outside. Come on, next. We're not doing next. There we go. And here's some other good things to grow outdoors. The Laelia anceps and its hybrids. This is a species, Laelia anceps. They are very, very well adapted to our climate. They don't mind the cold. They like our humidity. They don't mind if they get hot in the summer. They are just, everybody should have them. And as you see, they put on a pretty good show this time of year. The species comes everywhere from completely white to this purple and white to some gorgeous purples that have been really bred a lot. Some of them now have sort of feather designs on their petals. Everybody should be growing them. And then I wanted to show you also what they do. This I tied to a piece of bark. I have put, this is just Spanish moss, I've put there to help keep moisture around the roots. But look what it did. It is totally firmly attached. I could take the tie off with no problem because this is not leaving this bark for anything. So it's kind of a fun way to grow it. These you could grow in a tree if you wanted because they like our climate that much. Another fun thing is the anceps hybrids. These are all Laelia anceps hybrids. This is one of the most popular ones. It is called Santa Barbara Sunset. See, it has beautiful flowers. It can grow into a monster specimen plant that when it's in bloom may have, 25 spikes on it. You can put on a serious show with Santa Barbara Sunset. And again, if they have anceps in the background, they're going to love your patio. This is a very pretty one. This is one that was bred at, these come from Santa Barbara Orchid Estates. They have a good online ordering system. They do a lot of very good breeding of the Anceps hybrids. And it's just, you know, what's not to love about those colors? And this is another of their hybrids, which is, you know, just bam, in your face, spectacular. So these are the ones that really test your patience, though, because an Anceps will start putting up its flower spike in maybe September or even earlier, and it will grow and grow and grow, and maybe it will bloom by Christmas or maybe not till January. And so you keep watching and you come out, are you ready yet? Are you ready yet? But they do bloom eventually. Cymbidiums, I'm sure a lot of you grow cymbidiums. I didn't bring any because mine are just in bud. They're not in bloom right now. I would say that at the show, one of our members who was a very excellent and avid cymbidium grower died recently and gave his collection to our club. We have a conservation committee where we sell donated plants, and then we give grants to researchers and people all over the world who are working on orchid conservation. So, the last show we sold part of that collection. If you're there at 10 o'clock on Saturday, we're having the second half of that. So there should be some very nice cymbidiums for sale at the show. So that's to keep in mind. Oncidiums. Well, here's two different takes on oncidiums. This is a totally delightful little oncidium species. Isn't that cute? It's just starting to bloom. So you want to come up closer and see it. It gets these little ruffled yellow flowers on it. I grow this outdoors all year long. It is growing, again, it's growing on a piece of wood. It has a little bit of moss, but I water it every couple of days because you can't overwater a plant on a piece of bark, but you do need to give them fairly frequent watering. But this is, it's called Oncidium chirophorum. And if you've ever heard or seen Oncidium twinkle, it's this size, and this is one of the parents of twinkle, which has been very popular. This is one of my favorites. This is Oncidium sweet sugar, and this is the extremely yellow form, which is called lemon drop. But I have a number of sweet sugars. They love it outside. They put up gorgeous spikes. They make their own sunshine. When I've divided them, I think of giving them away, and then I don't, because I like having one over here, and one over there, and one over there. So I recommend this one. And many other of the oncidiums will grow outside as well. This is one of the Sherry Baby crosses, and Sherry Baby's claim to fame is it smells like chocolate. And it has these lovely bouquets of little purple flowers. This one you also could grow outdoors. Some of the oncidiums, you may be a little more sensitive, and so if you're expecting a really cold night, you want to give them a little more protection, bring them closer to the house, or put them in the garage even. But in general, they will do fine. Australian dendrobiums, I highly recommend these. This is one of the smaller types. This blooms off and on all year in this lovely purple color, and then it flushes a bunch of flowers in the spring. As you can see, it's covered with buds. They grow new shoots every year. They rebloom off the old shoots as well. And the Aussie dendrobiums are tough as old boots. They love it here. They don't mind getting hot. They don't mind getting cold. They are a wonderful addition to your assortment. You can see the big one there. That is speciosum. Those get huge like that, but they'll have a flower spike like a foxtail that's, this long and covered with 40 flowers. They have a wonderful scent. They're just quite amazing. This is one of the newer hybrids. that they're making that has the Australians now working about getting new colors and stronger yellows, red speckles, that sort of thing, into their flowers. And this is the one that's putting out the big scent. I came to my car this morning, I went, somebody has been perfuming my car. And this is just a young one. This is its first flower spike for me. So when it gets a little older, it will have a bunch of them. And again, these will bloom off the old growths and the new growths. Ancellias, I don't have an Ancellia here, but again, they're a very good outdoor plant. There's a single species of Ancellia that comes from all over Africa. They are everything from a small plant about this size to ones this tall. They have pale yellow flowers like the picture, up to heavily spotted golden brown flowers, some very large. So it's a fun group, again, and easy to be successful with. Some more of the outdoors. There are a number of cold-tolerant Cattleyas. The purpuratas, which are up here, those again come in many different colors. They are a summer bloomer. That's June glory. That one's Cattleya maxima, the purple one. That's more spring to summer. The nobile dendrobiums, they put on a beautiful show in the spring. They like to be rested for about 2 months in the wintertime with no water. Sobrelias, those grow as garden plants in Costa Rica and some of them get quite tall. Some of them will get like 10 feet tall. But there are a number of them that are about this height. That flower is about 3 to 4 inches across. The flowers don't last a long time, but they keep producing them. Once they're in their blooming season, they'll just do a succession of flowers. And they come in a bunch of different colors. So they're kind of fun. Epidendrums. This is what we call a reed stem epidendrum. This is a bit unusual because you can grow these in a garden bed. I brought today a number of little offshoots, we call them kikis, from this actual pink epidendrum, which is growing next to my fish pond. And anyone who wants to try them, I have a few in a bag here, and a sample of the flower. So they can be quite fun. Miltonias are another good one. And then some of the terrestrial orchids are fun to grow outdoors because they will come up in the spring or come up in the fall, and then when they go dormant, you just put them to the side and do nothing until they come up again. So they're very nice. If you do vacation a certain time of year, you could have some of the orchids that like a total rest for when you're going to be gone, and you don't have to get anyone to care for them. This is my shade house. It's now a great deal fuller than when I took that picture, but it's at the back of my greenhouse. And what I like to have is some protection from the rain because, especially in the wintertime, I like to control how much water my orchids are getting. And I don't want my flowers spotted by staying wet overnight. But it's otherwise a very simple structure. It's just, some wooden beams. And then I have shade cloth that I hang above it. We get hotter in Rancho Santa Fe than you do here. And if the shade cloth is sitting right on the roof, it actually heats the roof and the whole place gets warmer. If you suspend it about 8 inches above the roof, then it's shading the roof and it keeps the whole thing much cooler. But otherwise, I do nothing out there. I should have mist out there, I don't. I just water my hanging plants with a hose. And most things do just fine. I don't even have a fan out there. It just is in a good breezeway. Orchids like air. That's the other thing they get living on the tree. A lot of breeze going by the roots, going by the flowers. They really like air movement. There are many other orchid varieties that grow outdoors in our area. And if you come to our show, you will see a lot of stuff that will surprise you, and much of it will have been grown outdoors or perhaps in an unheated greenhouse. Many of our members do a lot of outdoor growing. And the nice thing about buying from vendors at the Orchid Show is they must be members of our society or they can't play. And they are knowledgeable people. This is not, the guy they hired yesterday who's taking care of the plants at Lowe's. These are people who know and love orchids. So if you don't know what you want, just come with a description of your conditions. What can you offer? And people can advise you. They will say, well, this would work for you, this would work for you, stay away from that. So it's a safe place to buy orchids. And our prices are reasonable, and the vendors they're good people, and they love orchids. They just want you to succeed, that's really cool. I do too. I think everyone in Southern California should be growing at least some orchids. They're just too wonderful and too much fun, and can be grown quite readily here. We'll talk just a second about a collection in bloom. If you decide that you would like to get involved with orchids, keep in mind that orchids have seasons, and many of them bloom only once or twice a year. And so if you buy everything that your facility will hold in March, you have a glorious display in March and April, and the rest of the year it's pretty green. So if you buy every quarter blooming plants, then you know that throughout the year you'll have new surprises coming up all the time. And your collection will always have flowers. One of the reasons that I keep Phalaenopsis in my greenhouse is because they bloom most of the time. So there's always some color from them. But it is a good way to organize your collection. And we are there to help you because our society has 4 shows a year, every quarter. The last weekend of the month, in January, in July, in October, we have a small show. Our big show this year used to be in Scottish Rite for years and years, but they're redeveloping that property. So this year we are in the park, but we have 2 patios, so we'll have bigger display, we'll have more vendors, and we will be on Earth Day weekend this year in April. So I hope that's what the postcards are about. I hope that you will come because I think you'll have a nice time. Fred Clark is going to be there. He's one of the best breeders of compact Cattleyas and also the Australian Dendrobiums in all of the US. He's a very sought after grower. So it'll be worth your while to come on down. And yes, so there's our orchid show. You can take a picture with your phone if you don't want to take notes. This is the one that's coming up this weekend. So come on down, as they say. We even have a kids' corner if you have children or get stuck with your grandchildren. We have games. We have a nice lady there so that children can have a good time. And come to our Orchids of the Earth. We think it's going to be a good show. We've been working very hard on it, and I hope you'll be there. If you do come to one of our shows, look for me, because I'm always there, wandering around, and I'd love to answer questions and anything else you like. So, I know we're almost at 11:30, so let's open it up to questions. Anyone have a question I didn't cover? Yes?
Advice for the potting, the pot. I see you have plastic and clay.
Yeah, and just I'm going to answer that, but let me say for anyone who wants to stay for a little bit longer, I am equipped to demonstrate how to repot a Phalaenopsis. So if you want to stick around for a minute, I will do that, but don't feel obliged. It's sort of the add-on to the lecture. I do several things. In general, I use a high-quality New Zealand pine bark for my potting mix, mixed with large perlite. I try to match the size to the root size. If I'm dealing with a really fine-rooted plant, like some of the oncidiums, I'll use quite a small bark because they dry out much faster. If I'm dealing with a large Phalaenopsis or a big Cattleya, I'll use big chunky bark because those big roots can hold water a long time. And I don't want the medium staying too wet. I really want it to dry out on time. And then there's a nice middle-sized bark that works for a whole bunch of different things. I would use that for Phalaenopsis in a smaller pot, or I often, when I'm potting Cattleyas, I'll start them in heavy bark, and at the very end, I'll put them in a finer bark. One thing to remember with orchids and repotting is you want to always wait until the orchid is putting out new roots. They do tend to do this rather seasonally. And if you repot an orchid when it is not in root growing mode, it may sulk for months to years. It may die. But if you plant it when it has bright new root tips showing, then it'll just take off and go. And so what I like to do is the older live roots, I'll put in the heavy bark at the bottom, and then when I get up to where those really new ones are, I'll switch to a little smaller bark because it's much easier to fit in and around those roots without damaging them. So and at our show, we sell pre-mixed bark, we sell an assortment of pots, so it's supplies are there. For some of the Phalaenopsis, especially the smaller ones, I will grow them in a high-quality sphagnum moss in a terracotta pot. The benefit of the unglazed terracotta pot is you can feel it, it's cold, it evaporates, and so the moss doesn't get soggy. So it's another good solution. Yes? Sometimes you won't get those to go down. Sometimes. In general, if your roots are sprangling all over and you want to confine them, then you soak it and get those roots super hydrated, and then they're much more flexible. But depending, some orchid roots, if it's one where its roots tend to branch, even a cut root or a broken root will probably send out a branch and carry on. Basically, the nice thing to know is that orchids really want to grow. They are not fragile, delicate plants. They're a little bit picky, but if you pay attention to their basic needs, they will do everything they can to grow for you. They will put up with being dried. They will put up with, if you sunburn them, okay, it will grow past that leaf, They're on your side, yeah.
I wondered, all these that you've told us about, will any of them actually grow on trees here?
Ones that would grow on trees, I'd say oncidiums, for sure, you can put on trees. You could put the anceps on a tree. Probably, this guy certainly could grow on a tree. Phalaenopsis are not a good one to put on trees because it gets too cold. If you lived in Florida, all day long. But we just get a little cold at night for the real tropicals. If you have them on trees, depending on the weather, but in the summertime, you're going to want to be having either put an automatic system on them or hit them with the hose every other day anyway, because those roots are just out in the air and they're going to dry out. Anybody else? Yes?
When you spoke about the pets, did you mention sloths?
I missed it.
Sloths or the snails?
Slugs and snails. Yeah. Okay. There is, Sluggo is probably the safest for if you have pets. There's another granule called That's It, which is really, really good at killing slugs and snails. I use that in my shade house. I don't have trouble with them out in the greenhouse because it's sealed. But yes, it is an issue. And you can tell when you have them because they will take a big chunk out of a leaf or they will eat that bud that you've been watching for the last 4 months and eat it off, yeah.
You spray peroxide on the way?
I haven't, I will if I'm dealing with a cut or something, I like peroxide. Or I might, if I'm trying to stop crown rot, peroxide is really good for that.
Not for the sloths. Not for the snails.
I haven't done it for snails, but I haven't had a big problem with snails. Does anyone, yes?
My cymbidiums are huge, full of blossoms and beautiful. Now when those blossoms are done, the last time I just took it and whacked it and
Repot? Yep. You can do that. They're very tough. Yeah. They're a pain in the neck. I've got a bunch of overgrown cymbidiums that I haven't dealt with when I should have because they're such a pain in the neck and they use up so much medium. So I sort of wait till the final hour before I do anything. Does anyone want to see a potting demonstration? Do we have time? No? Eeny beeny? I'll go really fast. I'll just do it quick. Unless that's not good. You tell me.
anyone who can stay can
Yes, what I'm saying is that...
I'd like to give you an applause.
Oh. Thank you. I hope you learned something. I hope you are feeling confident and inspired. That's what I'm looking for here. So. Oh, you are too far back. Yeah. I was thinking people should not be so far back. I'll just spread them a little bit.
Potting demonstration.
Oh, probably about 10 minutes.
Okay, because we have our luncheon.
At 12:30, you said that. I think we're okay.
Okay,
That one's, have you?
Yes.
Look at this.
Oh, yes. This is a zygopetalum, and the plant that it was on is so beat up from the rain that I didn't bring the plant, but I just broke the flower off. Smell that. It's really fragrant. Yes. Those you grow with your cymbidiums.
Move these. It smells like chocolate. Come around.
Oh, and start packing them up? Or no, I don't want to pack them up. I want people to see them for a minute.